Welcome to our Halloween episode from Raleigh Game Studios. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jeff.
As you probably guessed, today, in honor of Halloween, we are talking horror games and more specifically, what makes a good horror game. But without further ado, we're going to get right into talking Halloween, and I know this is probably one of Jeff's, if not Jeff's, favorite holiday of the year. I've always loved Halloween too. So
the most important thing with horror games is always atmosphere. That's a product of several different kind of elements, but it's always kind of one of the most important parts. Generally, what I see in successful horror games is obviously you want a dark atmosphere to a degree. You want a little bit of contrast there. Lots of good work with physics and shading and just light. Especially light is very important. And I think when you put that together with things like music, spooky music, and sound effects, or in some cases the lack thereof, you can make something that's pretty formidable.
That's one of the great things about atmosphere in general, is that it really is a combination of all those other design elements and all those other artistic touches that you put into the game, and when you combine them all in that particular formula that you've got set up for the game, it just comes together and it really draws you in.
There's just so much to be said for games that creep us out and do so with very minimal almost application. I mean, a lot of horror games that are really good weren't even that graphic at the time. I mean, I guess you could say that, but I think one of your favorites, I don't want to step on your toes, but Silent Hill that we mentioned.
Yeah, and Silent Hill definitely is a scary game to me. The atmosphere is what makes that game. I mean, you've got the limitations there. You've got the sound effects and how they used sound in the game, especially to alert you that there was somebody, there was enemies around. You had your little pocket radio that would start to crackle and hiss whenever an enemy got even closer, and you're just, when you start to hear that noise at first, and you're like, you're looking around with your character, coupled with the fog that was on the town.
Yes.
You can only see so far ahead of you, and it's just it's such a mundane detail that plays into it, because even in real life, when it's foggy out, it's creepy to me regardless of what time it is.
Resident Evil was kind of a different kind of vibe, because that game creeps me out from start to finish, even though it's not like supernatural zombies, it's a biohazard.
Right.
Spoilers if you have not played that game in 30 years, sorry. But the way they introduce silence in the hallway, and you just hear your footsteps, and in some rooms you get little soundtracks that kind of lead you to anxiety a little bit, because they're not comfortable soundtracks. They're compelling and strange, and you usually have a puzzle if there's a room with a soundtrack. Right. I thought that was really cool and kind of a great way to kind of manage your players' moods, because that game just like freaks me out, man.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the other end of it. Not just music there that's setting the tone, but then you have your ambient noise. That's the mood too, because you would walk into a room in Resident Evil, and you could hear, something's footsteps. You could hear something rustling. You could hear a murder of crows just out there somewhere that you can't see, just cawing. it's unnerving because you can't see, you can just hear it.
Yeah, that Raven room is like the creepiest too, because nothing, I don't think anything ever happens in it, but every time it gets me because the lighting is different. The sound, I think the soundtrack cuts when you walk in, and the angles are just weird. Like it's just the weirdest room that someone was like, I'm just gonna mess with people here.
Yeah.
Of course, what comes to mind, Castlevania.
Yeah.
And Super Castlevania 4 was for sure like my jam. 9-year-old Jeff had his Super Nintendo. But I think what struck me with that is their use of music, really good soundtrack. It still holds. I love that soundtrack. But just moments between where you're going from the intro section where there's just nothing, it's just very quiet, and it's kind of the calm before the storm, and then you pass through the gates leading into I guess Dracula's domain. Like you're not quite there yet, you're still in kind of the countryside outside of the castle, and then stuff picks up, and I think the Simon's Quest theme picks up, or just the way they used music even on like a card like that, where I mean the technology is like not nowhere near where it is today. The depth of sound is not there, but it's still like really, if not like horrifying and creepy. I mean, at times it was, but it was still just like it got you in the mood for that kind of spooky action.
This really sets the tone for the game and really makes you feel like it could be right out of one of your classic vampire movies, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, or even earlier like Nosferatu or something. So
ready to hunt some vampires.
But it's one of those funny things that in Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil, were loading screen, and instead of just having this static loading screen, Resident Evil had that, you're walking up to the door and you're opening it and you're closing it, and then just all of the the footsteps, and then the creak of the door opening, and then the slam of it shutting, and it sets that tone, and you just get like anxious. You're like, well, what's going to be behind the door? You don't. All those sounds play into that.
Yeah. And then you get in that door, and you hear groaning from like around the corner, but you can't see it because your camera, it's a fixed camera, and all you can see is your character facing you, and you're like, no, but
yeah,
I don't want to go anywhere because there's something, yeah. And that's absolutely a limitation. They couldn't render 3D, like they couldn't render that properly back in the day the way we would now, so they had to put 3D stuff on top of a 2D environment. And thus was born some of the scary stuff I've ever experienced. Well, that reminds me too, I think I'll talk about this off and on, but The Evil Within, which is a decent game. I really enjoyed playing it, but I was super critical of it at the time, for reasons we'll discuss later. But the limitation it had was very much not a product of the time. It was more intentional, and I think it was they limited the view to a very narrow kind of gaze. It's basically like widescreen, but like even less. And you didn't know, I didn't really think about it as I was playing it, but I read a couple articles on it, and I'm like, yeah, like that's true. It's very hard to keep. I mean, it's just this nagging feeling where you can't quite see everything that should be in view. And it did make things very claustrophobic and strange to a degree. I don't think it worked completely, but it made things pretty interesting. That brings me to writing, which is my one of my big things. I feel like a lot of the stuff we were talking about before, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Castlevania, like you have a basic story that you were telling through these levels, and it's real simple. Like you know, maybe you have some cutscenes with words across like a picture, but later on you get stuff like Resident Evil, which is the story is basically epistolary. It's all letters and memos and computer journal stuff. And you get breadcrumbs, and you're rewarded for solving puzzles and searching with more of the background, which I think is really cool. And you have a mystery that you need to solve, where they even make it pretty, like, you kind of have to just solve the mystery. Like, you can't just leave, because if you try to open the door, there are dogs outside.
Right. Yeah. And that's what chases you into the mansion in the first place. Like being chased, you're like, oh no, gotta go.
Yeah. No, why you can't go out there when you get the shotgun and you've already murdered like, a ton of dogs already. But
yeah,
horror game logic, it's fine. This Redfield just has like a weird like sunk cost complex kind of thing going on, where he's just like, well, I've already looked around this mansion so far, like might as well keep going.
Yeah, the original Resident Evil definitely to me is one of the hallmarks of good storytelling. There is that you do get pieces of it that just kind of unravel as you go further along. It's the same kind of world building that I've enjoyed ever since then, and with even non-scary games like Fallout or Skyrim, where the world's just filled with all these additional details that you wouldn't even think about.
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. And I mean, it helps when you have an unfolding mystery. To contrast that, there's another horror game that's it's another one of those that, like, I really enjoyed playing it. I really like it, but I also was really frustrated with it, and that is Eternal Darkness for the GameCube, which Jen turned me on to. She owned it, and it's eldritch horror. It's like Lovecraftian, spookiness, which is one of my favorite kinds of spookiness. But the cardinal sin they kind of commit is at the very beginning of the game, they show you the antagonist, and it's some like skeleton bro. Like it's a guy who's been resurrected to serve some old god. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna do this evil stuff now, and like that's how the game starts.
So you don't even build up to it. It's just there you go.
Yeah, it checks all the boxes with atmosphere. You've got a spooky mansion you're living in, and weird stuff is happening. There's like hallucinations you have as you get crazier and crazier, but they screw it up because there's no mystery, because I already know what I'm looking towards and against, and that just kills it for me.
And I think that's going back to the Lovecraftian horror, that is definitely one of those things that does rely on existential dread. You're basically spending reading your story, and you're just like, what is going on? And that's, I think, part of the impact is that you're just as disoriented and you're just as disoriented as your character, and it's kind of feel like that irrational and unreliable narrator, because you're like, I don't know what's going on either. You're along for the journey through the depths of madness.
I think the biggest design, one of the more influential design points for me is isolation. I think I could give like a ton of examples, because a lot of games do this well. I think despite the number of monsters in it, I think Dead Space does a great job of this, making a giant space or giant ship or space station, it's been a while, completely lifeless, and like there's just no one. You're just alone the whole time. The only other person that you have contact with is through radio, and that's it. And even that's a crapshoot. I don't want to spoil that, but and games like Amnesia, which Jen and I played over Christmas a couple of years ago. That was our Christmas. It was great. Where you're alone the whole time. You're not checking in with people. It's not hordes of demons coming at you, because even that is, for some reason, strangely reassuring.
Yeah.
You know, it's more about the things you don't see, or that silence and darkness that you're just not sure what's there waiting.
Yeah.
I mean, some games that's not the case, like Bloodborne, which I've been tempted to gush about this entire session, and I won't do it. But I love it so much because it checks so many of these boxes. FromSoft always has awesome games. I would even classify Dark Souls as a horror game to an extent, but it does such a good job of populating the world with, you're basically in this like cramped city with these deranged beasts running around, killing people, and you go up to doors with these like lanterns outside, so that's how you know someone's in there. And you'll have a conversation with this person. You can't see them, which is a little bit of the uncanny already. In this otherworldly kind of ghostly city, these people talking to you, but as you go, you meet maybe like 3 people that you can actually talk to and that you see. But like all of these people you're talking to who are behind closed doors, eventually they either go crazy and become beasts themselves, and you just hear like snarling back there, or it's just dead quiet. They're just not there anymore. It's really well done, programming characters in and having dialogue and exposition, and still isolating you. You don't have a single ally in the whole game. You just don't. I mean,
we've gone over everything that we love about horror games.
yes.
So cool. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've had a good Halloween.
Yes.
I know
Continue watching the countdown.
Yeah. I hope you've done your trick-or-treating, or maybe not. I don't. Maybe someone's thrown candy at you and you've gotten it from somebody, but
Assaulted you with candy.
Yeah, candy assault.
Yeah, next month we're going to do games we are thankful for. So Chris and I are going to discuss our top 5 games, and we'll see if we can limit it to that.
Yeah. Well, stay tuned, and thanks for watching another Raleigh Game Studios vlog. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jeff. Peace.